Good afternoon, everyone. We thought about doing that about 7 o'clock this morning, but we figured you'd like more than 2 hours of sleep. But we just want to give you a little bit of update and some more information. We had a beautiful day yesterday in Georgia, and it's a beautiful day here again. It was just a very successful election day. We saw Georgians from all over the state cast their ballots to make their voice heard. It's still a wonderful thing. This vote, this democracy, this republic. I still stand in awe of what we saw and what our forefathers have built in this nation. Something so unique in human history. It's truly divinely inspired. That said, it takes people, lots of people, very hardworking people, to make it happen. So I want to give credit first to our elections team here in my office that is led by our director, Blake Evans, the deputy director, Dr. Jesse Harris, and Michael Barnes, our director of the Center for Elections. Their team has done amazing work, and they worked with the greatest county election teams that I think our nation has to do the tough, on-the-ground work of running polling locations, processing voters, and counting the votes. And speaking of processing voters, we had an average speed of processing voters at the polls that was simply amazing. We saw processing speeds of 48 seconds, and it actually dipped down to 47 seconds for a few moments. It was that kind of processing speed that led to 2-minute average wait times, across the state. I have a screenshot of it. Anyone wants to see it later. I read online that there was a person who wanted to test our line warming law. So he loaded his car with boxes and cases of bottled water to give the voters in line. So he started driving around, and his problem was he couldn't find any lines. And so he even said in the article, quote, "The system is running so smoothly today that no one lined up in the sun." So that is tremendous to see that kind of responsive and good results that we had at the county level. And I know all of you are probably voters also, and you probably had that same fantastic experience. And the credit for that goes to the counties, and it goes to the voters. The voters took record advantage of pre-election day voting. They had shattered the records for both absentee by mail and early in-person voting in a midterm. And we have seen that the counties almost fully complete the counting, and it's only a little after 2 p.m. on Wednesday. We see less than 10,000 voters to potentially be added to the count outside of the handful of votes that can be accepted by Monday, November 14th. Most of the races have a clear winner. In fact, Bee Nguyen and I spoke last night, and she graciously conceded. And I thank her for that. That's the way it's supposed to be. We need all candidates who come up short to acknowledge it and to come back and fight within our system another day if that's their choice. There is one race in our state that is going to be moving to the December 6th runoff. That is the race for the United States Senate between Senator Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. Our office has already begun the behind-scenes work to start building the ballots. So ballots are being built as we speak, and counties are making preparations. So some specifics for the process. Voters can request absentee ballots now through Monday, November 28th. There are about 150,000 voters who will receive an absentee ballot because they are on our absentee ballot rollover list. These people are either 65 or they're disabled. Our absentee ballot request portal is now open. Early voting must begin no later than Monday, November 28th in all counties. We do anticipate that some counties may likely have Saturday voting following Thanksgiving, as well as on November 26th. We are working with the counties to find out what their plans are on this front, and as soon as possible, so that their voters can make the best plans. This will be a very heavy lift for our counties because it's a 4-week runoff period, but I have confidence that they will take all the measures required to rise to the task. While we are working, preparing for the runoff, we all have our obligation to close out the November 8th election. Counties must certify by Tuesday, November 15th by 5 p.m. Then we move to the risk limiting audit. We will, quote, roll the dice, so to speak, on Wednesday, November 16th. Then the audit must be complete by November 22nd. And the state must certify by Friday the 25th. That's the day after Thanksgiving. It's a lot of work, but that's how the machinery of our democratic republic works. We welcome it because we know at the end of the day, everyone wants to know that we have honest and fair elections, and we do. I ask the voters to come out and vote one last time. We have no control over how many campaign ads our voters are going to see over the next 30 days, but we'll make sure that we have honest and fair elections. I want to thank the voters. I want to thank you for your strong participation. I want to thank you for just being so friendly and really working with the system. We only had 7 precincts out of 2,700 that didn't finish yesterday. It had to extend past, the 7 p.m. deadline. I want to thank the election workers. They worked long days yesterday, and they'll be working some long days ahead. I want to thank the poll workers, and I want to thank all of their families who support them. And a special thank you to our team. Thank you, and I will take your questions. Yes, ma'am. No, we kind of knew where it was headed, and we wanted to make sure that it was what it was going to be. And right now we're down under 10,000 votes, and we look at how many this person has and add all 10,000 to it, they wouldn't have 50%, likewise on the other side. And so that's why we're going to tell you that there will be a runoff, and that's why we started building ballots this morning. Voters have their free will choice to vote all 3 methods. No excuse absentee voting, and if they want to get your request in soon, then we're going to have early voting. It'll be an abbreviated schedule. It'll be that 5 days plus most likely a Saturday, and some counties will do a Sunday. That's their choice, or on election day, which is Tuesday, December 6th. We give voters options in Georgia. They get to choose which one they like best. They have. It is what it is, and we have a 4-week runoff period. And so I know that the candidates will be working on that, and that's why we're working today building ballots.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, that's what I wanted to ask you now. With Senate Bill 202 having this compressed runoff timeline, does that make this election tougher?
What we've shown is our team and the counties have shown that they can perform at the highest level. And I'll even go so far. I know every Secretary of State takes pride in what their election office does, but when I was in our war room yesterday looking at all the innovations and improvements our team has made, and I look at the work that our counties have made, that's why Heritage has recognized Georgia #1 for election integrity on the right side, and that's why on the left side the Center for Election Innovation and Research has recognized Georgia #1 for voter accessibility. I would stack up Georgia against any state in the union. I think our team is the best, and I'd put it up against anyone. I think it's as good as the Bulldogs. Yes, there will be a runoff. We can look at the outstanding vote totals, and neither one would be over 50%.
How soon could somebody start voting? How soon could an absentee ballot be returned? How soon could early voting start? Do you have to wait for certification to be completed before a ballot can be received?
Gabe, do you have the date on that, or Ryan, Germany? We'll get you that date. By state law and House Bill 316, we're required to do a 90% risk limit. And so that means that we actually will do a sample size of the ballots that were cast. So it's not all the ballots, it's picking a sample size so we can verify the outcome of the race. And so it has to be within that 90% confidence level. And so that's why we talk about rolling the dice of what those ballots will be, the number of those by county. And so we'll be selecting that, and we'll have a press conference tomorrow on now which race it is, and then additional details about the risk limiting audit. Well, we've always had, it was really probably before a 5-week runoff period. It's now really a 4-week runoff period for states. What happened when we went to the instant runoff for UOCAVA ballots, it allowed us to have just one runoff instead of the 9-week we had before. So that is really, I think, advantageous. So the counties are prepared already. They note that we're going to have this period of time. We're building the ballots, and then they're working on their back office system to get prepared. Yes, sir. Well, I think it did, because if you look at what SB 202 did, first of all, it required that lines had to be shorter than 1 hour. So what the counties do, they performed. And yesterday I screenshot when we had line time of 2 minutes. And it really held that constant. Now, we had some places where it's 15 minutes, things like that. At 7 a.m., we had a few precincts that had to get their system in place, but it worked. And we kept those lines short. That then took care of the people said that, what about water? Well, people were politicking for 2 years ago, and so that took out that you're not going to be politicking within those zones. But with short lines like that, 47 seconds for check-in, you obviously didn't need that, even though it was a warm day yesterday, beautiful day. Also, we now have no excuse absentee voting, and no excuse absentee voting with photo ID. We had it with signature match, and we had actually been sued by the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. Both of them said, this is subjective. I said, no argument by me, because that's what I said we need to get away from back in 2018. We went to an objective criteria, which is driver's license with photo ID, and they've actually been using that in Minnesota for over 10 years. So if you look at then the proof of the numbers, the early votes, the absentee, we have just good numbers, and people are out there voting, and the system is working well. Yes, ma'am. Well, I want to specifically address that. It was a localized issue at Cobb County, and that Cobb County election director is actually one of our top, election directors. But she lost a staff member that had been there for 25 years, and a new person filled in, and she took full responsibility. And then when she realized the mistake was made, absentee ballots weren't sent out on 2 separate days. They overnighted those absentee ballots. And then they also included a next day air package to bring it back. And then they signed an agreement. Judge had a consent order with that county. But they're working and making sure that they'll check that and double check that in that process, because they realized that was a critical mistake, and that will be brought before the state election board after the election. Yes, sir. Where we have in the Senate race right now, it's a greater than 0.5%. Recounts are within the 0.5%, and so this will be just a runoff race. The top 2 vote getters will be in that. But with risk limiting audit, what actually I talked about was we have to require by state law to pick a statewide race to do a risk limiting audit, and really that's to give voters confidence in the process. And that's going back to 2020. We wanted to elevate that because of just the national dialogue that we were having at that time. And that's why we took it above the 90% as required. We actually took it to 100%. And instead of scanning it through the machines because they were disparaging the accuracy of the machines, we did 100% hand recount and got virtually the same answer, probably in about 40 counties, but overall it never changed the results. So we'll do the standard process, picking a statewide race and then doing a sample size, and it's all based on mathematical and scientific procedures, and it'll be an open and transparent process, and we encourage all of you to dig into it so you can report back to your viewers and your readers. Yes, ma'am.
Just given the record turnout that you saw and the level of the record turnout yesterday, what are you projecting for this runoff? Are you concerned some perception changes have to
We hope that the voters don't have fatigue, because this is where you get to exercise your priceless franchise, the right to vote. And so we're going to encourage everyone, come on back out one more time. I know that the candidates will be doing that on both sides. By the end of the day, it's up to the voters. But we're going to make sure we have fair and honest elections. The counties are going to be prepared. And I got to give counties high marks. If you look at where we were for line times and the process, they were working some long hours, but they did great work. No, well, I like to joke that I'm the runoff king, because when I ran for city council, I was in a runoff. Then when I ran for the state house, that was a jungle primary. Then I was in a runoff in that one. And then 4 years ago, I was in a runoff for the primary and then a runoff in the general. And so I kind of know that process. And it is humbling sometimes when you realize, oh, out of all these people that live in my city, only this many voted in the runoff. So typically the numbers are lower, but this office doesn't really make projections. We'll just tell the counties, prepare for large numbers, and then they're better to be over-prepared, and the numbers don't come in where you think. But that's something the voters get to decide.
We have one more question from the secretary, then we'll hand it off.
Well, I think it's always healthy to make sure that you have over 50%. I like that. We instituted the UOCAVA instant runoff system, and that really let us accelerate that process. But I think at the end of the day, to make sure you have 50 plus 1, that's good, because a democracy says majority rules. And so we don't want it to be ruled, because we believe that it's participatory, but it's really 50%. And so I think at the end, that's good. If people want to discuss further improvements of the process, I'm happy to entertain those.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Great. Any detailed questions anybody has around outside of policy stuff we can answer? But I do want to say tomorrow the secretary is going to have a press conference. We tentatively have it set for 11 o'clock to announce the race that will be audited on the risk limiting audit. So with that, let me see, Jason, you've been raising your hand for a second. Frankly, I'm kind of want to knock on wood, because we got by yesterday with no real issues. So we will continue to have Secretary Raffensperger's poll worker first response texting tool in place in those situations. We will have to figure out, because we don't have the announced locations for early voting locations, what every county is going to do. A county like Fulton had 36 locations in the regular general election. They may not have 36 this time, so we have to work with them and local law enforcement to see what has to be covered. But obviously that's part of the moving parts we're going to deal with going forward. But we haven't seen anything that's risen to a level that says, yes, this is an imminent threat from any source so far. Not to say that there couldn't be, and this office's position as always is our biggest concern is a lone wolf, which nobody has any way of knowing about beforehand. Yeah, Justin. Again, the state of Georgia, our costs don't move that much because we have a set staff. The real costs go down to the counties, and that will not be inexpensive, but we have no way of making those estimates. Yes. There are less than 10,000 outstanding votes right now, and of that 10,000, 5,163 are provisionals, so not all of those will make it into the final count. As you know, you have until, in this case, because of Veterans Day, we have till Monday, November the 14th to have all those provisionals verified if it requires work on the voters' part. So that's a big part of it. Mark, yeah. Well, I think the soonest we're going to see anybody voting in person is going to be November the 26th. And we're going to be certifying on November the 25th. And you've reached a point where it becomes a little more hinky, for lack of a better word, because of the dates with the risk limiting audit and stuff in the way of this. Now, one thing I want to clarify, the people have talked about SB 202 shortening the runoff time to 4 weeks. That has traditionally been the runoff time in this state for many years until a federal lawsuit came through, and because of the UOCAVA, extended it to the 9 weeks. If you remember, Paul Coverdale was elected in a 4-week runoff. I believe Saxby had a 4-week runoff. The state has executed 4-week runoffs in the past with early voting, with no excuse absentee, and with election day voting. This is not the first time we've had to do this. This is not that unique. Archa. Well, don't forget that most of the Uokava ballots have already done their instant runoff, the ones that have come in. We're going to change out the ones for anybody who has not sent in the Uokava ballot. We're working on the logistics of that right now to put in just the runoff ballot itself for the electronic ballot delivery side for those voters. But that requires a little bit more work on our side to see who those voters are, because the swath of the Uokava voters who already voted, they've already executed their vote for the runoff. It'll be a small number overall, and you can go to our data hub once we upload that to see how many are already there. All right, Mark. I feel like it's a tennis match. You give me one like this. Nobody in the middle wants to ask anything. So. Yes. Well, there's a couple things at play here. First and foremost, Georgians took huge advantage of our pre-election day voting. And the whole point of having pre-election day voting is to take pressure off election day. So on that point, it was a very successful execution of the rules and laws that we have based on SB 202, the SEB rules, and the courts that have kind of lined these things up. We had over 2.5 million beforehand. Now, election day itself, this is one of the things, and we'll go back to my old life as a political consultant, negative campaigns tend to depress turnout. And I think all of us who live in this state might have seen a handful of negative ads, especially around the Senate race. So psychologically speaking, we can't speak to exactly why it was lower, but I think that's probably a large part of it. A lot of people just kind of threw up their hands and said, I don't want to deal with any of this stuff, and I'm just going to move on. So that's part of the reason we probably saw that. I was excited. I was optimistic. I was hoping for that 2 million day yesterday. We didn't have it. But 1.4 was a solid day. It got us back to, a pretty good turnout. We saw wide margins in most of the races with the exception of the Senate race. And voters had every opportunity to make their voice heard. Nobody got in the way of those things. And just looking at how quickly we were moving things, I don't think even if we had had 500,000 to 700,000 more, we would have seen any significant lines, just because of the way things were processing. And we were kind of keeping an eye on that as best we could. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of those kind of things where there's always going to be something that happens on Election Day, and that's kind of how our day started. Fulton County had contacted us the evening before saying, some of these social media posts have been brought to our attention. We saw some of them, and they, in a vacuum, could be concerning. But then, by the morning, there had been more discovered, where the individual in question had literally posted selfies at the Capitol on January 6th and used the term, they wrote this themselves, "Today we stormed the Capitol." So it's not like anybody was accusing them of storming the Capitol. They said they stormed the Capitol. So when Fulton County asked us, what do you think we ought to do? We said, this is your decision. It is your ability to decide how to mitigate risk in your own election. Whatever you decide, we understand it, and this is your thing to decide. And listen, at the last minute discovering that, I think it was a better part of valor to make that decision. If they discovered it 2 or 3 weeks earlier, maybe they had a conversation, had them sign some stuff, do some extra training. But knowing they were going in that day and they just had that information, I think it was probably a not unwise decision on Fulton County's part to take those particular poll workers off the grid for a moment. Anyone else? All right. Thanks, y'all. Hopefully see you not as much in the next 4 weeks.